Bonjour tous, grimacing. I'm sure that some of you may be wondering why I introduced myself in French. Well, just so we know, I'm not from France. I do not speak very good French, and this here is because I'm trying something a little bit different. Tonight's stories will be in English, translated from French. These are Let's Not Meet encounters from the beautiful country of France. I decided I'm going to release another couple of sleep videos, so take your time, let the ocean sounds in the background or white noise take you into a beautiful place and allow yourself to see the beautiful nightmares. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. My name is Ethan, and today I managed to take the plunge on the advice of a friend. He managed to convince me to use my Reddit account to tell you about these two strange stories I experienced with really creepy people that at the time left me with a terrifying impression. Today, having managed to gather my courage, we are going to focus on the first of them, the most recent and surely the least worst of the two. Let me set the scene for this story. Placed under the sign of the craziest bad luck that the universe could send me at the moment. All names I have used in this story have been changed. July 27, 2018. I'm going to a birthday of a friend who lives about 15 minutes by car from my home. At the time, I was at my parents' house and they had taken a vacation to recharge their batteries, leaving me the only company, which was my dog, a female Bernese mountain dog, Shayna. So I get ready to go to this party. I make sure Shana is somewhere that she can eat and drink and that all entrances are closed before I leave. On the way, I stopped to pick up my friend Carl, who lived only 2 short kilometers away from me, about 3 minutes. And together we set off towards our friend Jean's birthday. It must have been around 7 p.m. when we arrived at Jean's house. To put it very simply, the birthday party lasts until 9 p.m. and it brings together most of our childhood and high school friends. At least there are about a dozen of us. We spend most of the time celebrating our friend's birthday, which is normal, you might say. But you also have to understand that these are people that I see on a very rarely basis, hardly at all in my life. Generally, we may see each other once every couple of months when the conditions are favorable. At the time, I hadn't seen my friends for about 6 months due to a personal event that had upset me, and I was extremely happy to have been able to join this little party. The discussions flowed smoothly, as if we had seen each other the day before, and finally the end of the evening had arrived. Well, at least that's what I thought. 9 p.m. My friend Jean informs all the guests that he would like to continue the evening by going somewhere to eat. At this time, I was really not that motivated by the invitation, unlike the other guests who seemed to be very interested. But I was quickly made to agree by the effort of Jane. So we organized ourselves to make the trip as a group and not to take 12 different cars, with the destination being a McDonald's located about 25 kilometers from my friend's house. I decided to take my car so that I didn't have to rely on anyone else to take me home, not wanting to leave Shayna locked up for too long. Carl and Edgar, another couple of friends, decided to get in my car, and together we all went to the McDonald's. At this precise moment, I really have no idea of what the time actually was. I'm really in the euphoria of the evening. The previous months had been particularly hard for me and had gradually forced me to withdraw into myself. The meal passes quite quickly, and Jean gets up from the table, cheerful, and invites us to follow him to a nightclub, which this time is not really that close. It's quite far from our location, in fact. The location that the nightclub is in is about 30 kilometers, or about 25 minutes of travel. Except that I quickly calculated in my head, compared to my parents' house, 40 kilometers or 32 minutes. That's without counting that I have to bring Carl back. For me, the decision was quickly made. I would not go to the nightclub. Firstly, because it's not really a place that holds pleasant memories for me, and secondly, because I was tired, and the prospect of making a fairly long journey back didn't appeal to me, especially since it was well into the night at this point. Most people seem surprised by my choice, especially Jean, who insisted that I came, but I really didn't want to go, didn't want to change my mind. Not being very infused with the proposal either. Carl and Edgar decided to come home with me. I'm in my car. Edgar is sitting in the passenger seat, and Carl, slightly more tired than the rest of us, is lying in the back. During the trip, Edgar, who lived in the same place as Jen, decided that in order to save me gas and not get tired, he would sleep over at Carl's, and they would see me tomorrow to organize things so that Edgar could return home. The journey goes by quietly. We talk a lot of stupid things, probably because of fatigue. The atmosphere inside is rather calm. We speak in low voices. The flow of speech quickly dries up, and we move towards Carl's house. To quickly explain the configuration, Carl lives in a village very close to my parents' home. There is a short straight line, a bend, a long straight line, uphill, a bend again, and finally a short straight line of about 100 meters, which leads to the village. The first thing you'll see is the entrance sign, where at this point there are 2 skips behind. Once past this sign, we advance a few dozen meters, which leads to a very small roundabout, similar to those in towns, and Carl's house is literally at the second exit, in the middle of the village square. I'm exhausted. We're on the final long straight before taking the turn that leads to the entrance sign. My companions are in a similar state of mind, on the verge of falling asleep. But one detail will attract the attention of the whole car, and not the least. I see car headlights shining after the turn, not on low beam position but in high beam position, so we can see them from afar. Entering the bend, I began to slow down to about 50 kilometers an hour to prepare for my entry into the village and its ridiculously located speed bumps. We come out of the bend and we face the car, motionless on the right side, so on our side of the road. The headlights are turned right onto our faces, and my first thought is to slow down drastically to about 10 kilometers an hour instinctively. I think about the possibilities as to what's going on. The worst, it could be an accident, or simply that the driver is stuck in the ditch, and so I stop in the middle of the road. The car is an ordinary white C15, its headlights illuminating our faces and sitting on the road, a dark silhouette because of the light. The figure is sitting on the hood of his car like someone sitting at the edge of a swimming pool, completely serene. I manage to make out that it's a man in his 30s with short black hair, just like the thick beard that covers the lower part of his face. He is shirtless, despite the cool evening, in strangely dirty black shorts, and his feet, he wears a pair of Vans. Edgar rolls down the window on his side and starts asking the person if everything is okay, if he needs help or not. He gets off his car, walks silently towards my friend who calls to him, and that's when our two eyes meet. I see the inside of his eyes, despite the meters that separated us. And for the second time in my life, my instinct screams at me that I am facing danger. With one hand, I roll up Edgar's passenger window. With the other, I put my car into first gear and slowly move it towards retaining its position on the road, trying to slowly move away from this creepy individual. My gaze in the rearview mirror to monitor his reaction. That guy was really weird, Edgar tells me, looking as best he can at the rearview mirror. It's true. What is he doing half naked in such a remote area? The guy, we ask him if he's okay, if he's broken down and everything, and he didn't even answer us, adds Carl, slightly more awake than earlier. At this point, we're literally only about 30 seconds away from reaching Carl's house, just to simply get past the speed bumps, the roundabout, and then turn to the square to drop them off. And during this very short period of time, my friend raises a question after question, while my gaze remains focused on the white SC-15, which does not move. It's in this moment that Carl and the youth warrior decides to tell a joke, which at the time made me laugh way harder than it should, and when I think about it now, it really wasn't that funny. But he says, "Don't you think it's likely that he was throwing a corpse into the skip?" I park in the square. Carl and Edgar get out of my car. We talk for a few more minutes while I finish the cigarette that I had lit, and we say goodbye. I get in my car, and the idea of having to pass that guy again to go home sounds more and more like a terrible idea. Not wanting to make a 15-minute detour to get home, and convincing myself that it's all just a figment of my imagination, I start my car. this is the point where I made the biggest mistake of my life. I leave the square, into the roundabout, and unsurprisingly, the man in his S15 are still there. Except for one detail. The rear doors of his vehicle are open, as is the lid of one of the dumpsters, and I see him throw out a small white trash bag. Kinda looking like one of the ones you see in an office trash can. He throws in one, then another, and then another. You have to understand one thing, that is at this moment my body is acting on its own, where my mind is completely appalled by the surreal situation playing out in front of me. I remember telling myself that it's not possible and that I'm hallucinating, and that I'm being very, very serious about it. I hit the speed bump. I see inside the S15, which is filled with around 10 or so more similar bags. Our eyes finally meet. Barely a few seconds pass, my car slows down and I see the guy screaming in rage like crazy. He throws the last bag that he's holding in his hands into the dumpster, closes the car's back doors, and without wasting a second, I put my foot on the accelerator and drop the gears one after another. I round the corner, go up to 130 kilometers an hour on the long straight, and then around the second corner, and I see him at a distance. I arrived in front of my parents' house. I turned into the small path that leads to the parking lot. I turned off my headlights and the engine and lowered myself into my seat without really thinking. I start to laugh softly, unable to believe the stupidity of my action, and tell myself, like an idiot, that I really went crazy and thought I was in an action movie. The whole situation scared the life out of me because of Carl's joke, and he probably would have laughed when he saw me do what I did. If anything, this guy was completely drunk or high on cannabis or something. He was throwing around some illegal things and he just wanted to freak me out. Even if my brain tried to rationalize by filling in the gaps, my gut was clear. There were too many coincidences for it to be trivial. It's about 10 seconds before that I see headlights coming around the corner, but I have plenty of time to grab my phone and dial Edgar's number before the guy's car pulls up to my parents' house. To give you an idea as to what the area looked like, the route in which I had taken from Carl's to get to my parents' house breaks off into a Y. The bottom of the Y being the road leading to the village and Carl's house, and the two parts at the top being the bits that separate roads, although the one on the left has a stop sign. I was really expecting him to take the right road and go straight, but instead he not only took the left that led to my parents, but he used it to turn around and stop at the stop sign. At this point I'm completely paralyzed. I am in my car, hidden as best as possible, and I see him get out of his car and start screaming. He seems completely mad with rage. He violently slams his door, kicks his vehicle, letting out screams from time to time, and then suddenly he attacks the sign next to him and launches into a scurry of blows against the post. I am stunned at the scene. Edgar answers his phone. At that moment, I was very brief. The trash guy chase me home. We were able to exchange 2 or 3 sentences with difficulty. I stammered a lot, barely managing to calm the flow of my thoughts and worries that were dumping and drumming in my head. And just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, the universe did me a favor again by making it, well, worse. The guy had just calmed down. His gaze was directed towards me. He probably recognized my car and was slowly walking towards me. My parents were in a car accident when I was little. It caused the car to roll over onto its roof into a ditch. My father was stuck because of his seatbelt, and my mother had managed to get out of the car, breaking her foot to open the door. Following this mishap, my parents advised me to always have a knife in my car. I couldn't tell if this was courage, unconsciousness, or rage, maybe something else. I'll let you be the one to judge. But with the fear pumping through me, and without much hesitation, my brain seemed to switch into instinct mode, which is probably what pushed and led me to open my glove box and grab this knife. I got out of my car, stood in the front with the knife in my hand and the phone in the other. I yelled at the individual that I was on the phone with the police, that I was on it right now, and that they were on their way, and he could either decide to leave or wait. But I warned him that he would not be able to take me because I had a knife and I would not hesitate to use it. I was shaking like a leaf. My voice was both shaky and covered with my stress. In all fairness, I still wonder how I managed to stand up so seriously. I think I was so scared and under pressure that my brain must have desperately jumped into fight mode and realized I had nothing to lose. Time seemed to freeze. The man and I stared at each other for another few seconds, and then he rushed toward his car, turning it on and disappearing into the night. At this point, I just collapsed onto the ground, leaning against my car, barely managing to light a cigarette. I had to try 5 times before I succeeded, and I started laughing and crying at the same time. Edgar and I ended the call once I had calmed down. The next day, I went to make a statement to the police without much hope that this patient would be found. I only had a vague description of him. His vehicle, no plates to support my complaint. I still asked the officers to search the trash. I wanted to know what could make someone chase a stranger home. And then I went home afterwards, slightly relieved. Unfortunately, nobody was found. Nothing illegal was discovered in the trash cans. Even today, I'm not sure what the individual wanted, even though my friends and I laugh about it. I do wonder, though, what this guy wanted from me, and what would have happened if we did stop and try to assist him in the beginning. So, crazy garbage dude. Let's not meet. Hello everyone. I just came into this Reddit to tell you a story about something that happened to me last summer in June. My name is Emily. I was 16 years old at the time, and I was therefore in my late years of high school. Since the class council had passed, I had my free time which I spent primarily going to exercise in the park near my house. For Montepilla residents, it's the La Ruse Park. It is a park surrounded by houses and buildings, which is quite busy and which is quite cool facilities for doing sports like pull-up bars, etc. So here I am doing my sport quietly, and once I finished, I tell myself that I'm going to take a little walk around the park. So I take my bike and go a little further. Where I end up, there's some kind of sculpture that looks fun to climb. So in a spur of the moment whim deal, I climbed it. Once at the top, I put my phone down and got back down to continue climbing the thing from other places. And that's when I noticed there's this guy who comes towards me and starts talking to me. I can't hear him because I have my headphones on, and when I take them off, I can hear him telling me that I have to leave. That there is a man who escaped from Melong prison in the suburbs of Montepilla. He introduces himself as Captain Rosato. I don't know if this is a joke because he's not dressed like a captain at all. But I have nothing to gain by staying anyway. I had already met a shady but cool guy in the week before, so I'm not really worried at this point about the gentleman. I go up the structure to get my phone, which I had left at the top. I then go back down and look at him. While he has gone a little further, he looks at me and he's furious. He tells me, "You have to leave." I reply, Yeah, don't worry, I just had to get my stuff. He then tells me to get on my knees. I'm sorry, what, sir? He tells me to get on my knees. He repeats his name and title, basically ordering me to get on the ground. I ask him why. Ask him if he would like me to get on my knees. Tell me why. At this point, I can't leave. My things are scattered on the floor, and I won't have time to take everything back. He starts walking towards me, screaming, "Get on my knees." I'm repeating myself as he grabs me and starts putting me into some weak judo hold, one that I probably could have gotten away out of, but I tell myself that I'm not going to resist because physically he's 50 and I'm 16, that I'd be crazy and I really didn't know what he's capable of. He holds me on my knees, heads against the ground, hands on my back. He starts telling me that he's going to have to talk to me. I feel him pushing me down harder and lifting up my clothing and trying to reach under my dress. I know he's not doing what he's supposed to do at this point, and that he's clearly trying to hurt me or assault me in some way. I start screaming, and then suddenly I hear a woman ask if I'm okay. The police officer, or whatever he is, tries to say that he is. And I start shaking my head. No, I'm not. Please let me go. The mother asks, "Do you know her?" to the captain. And he says that everything is under control. That this is his job and he's with the special forces. The mother looks at me and at him and states that this is my niece. Let her go. And she tells me to come here. She starts to come closer and the captain pushes her away. But she's suddenly joined by another person from the park. As there's two of them, this guy realized he doesn't have a chance, and the guy that came up after the incident had kind of started ends up grabbing the captain. They call the police, and he stays there with them in the park, talking to his collar as if there was some sort of microphone on it. I can't tell you how terrified this whole situation left me. But I would like to say to the couple that saved me in the park, thank you. And to the crazy captain, let's not meet ever again. I'm going to tell you a story that I lived through and that I'm still living through today. I met a person named Lewis. I changed his name to keep him anonymous. In the 6th grade. I had just arrived at this college during the year and didn't know anyone. On the first day, I met this famous Lewis with whom I spent the morning with since there was no classes in the afternoon. The next day, Lewis didn't return to the class, and I learned his father had committed suicide the day before. Therefore, the day we met, after Lewis did not come in for 2 weeks, he did eventually return to class. I continued my life with this new friend, but I quickly realized that he was rather disturbed, and that he was starting to fall into smoking, alcohol, and he was doing a lot of stupid things. I want to remind you that we are in the 6th grade at this point. One thing led to another, and he found himself dealing cigarettes at the middle school until his 5th grade year. In 5th grade, the problems truly started. At one point, he threatened another student, threatening to kill them if they didn't show their genitals to him. And once they did, he used the opportunity to touch them. The college management was never informed, but following all the problems that he created, he was on the verge of expulsion. I often found myself at the CPE because of being his friend. The CPE asked me questions about his mental health and about mine. The CPE agent was worried about me. She searched for us regularly, and then they eventually asked me to remain his friend until the end of the year, because he was going to be let go, expelled. In all fairness, I'll spare you the recounting of all the numerous meetings and the various college administration offices, because, in all fairness, it was just BS, in which I was included because for them I was his friend and therefore I was aware of everything. Someone came to look for me in math class at one stage. They came to ask me where a knife was hidden that he had brought to the establishment. I'm looking at this individual asking me with no idea, yet they still took me to the office where all the members of the college management as well as the police threatened me, even though I knew absolutely nothing about it. They did all of this just to let me go back to class because I had absolutely nothing to do with it. Later on, I found out that he had hidden this knife with the intention to kill another student. He was suspended at the end of 5th grade. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. In 4th grade, I just wanted to be a good friend to him. But one time he took me into a shed. He tried to get me to touch him. I managed to leave by faking a call to my grandmother. Additionally, at the same time, he was expelled from his new school that he went into. Unfortunately, I don't know why he was expelled for this one. Following this incident, though, he started committing a lot of crimes, which I will summarize for you, because otherwise this story would be too long. In his 3rd school, in a boarding school, he was expelled for touching another student, plus attacking another student. In the 2nd grade, he went to an apprenticeship but was fired for sexual assault. He forcibly performed oral on a colleague, and he was fired from his 2nd rotation for similar reasons. In 1st grade, he received 5 complaints for sexual assault and was kicked out of school, which agreed to welcome him even after all the shocking comments that he made towards others, sexually motivated comments. Currently, he is in risk of prison. He is still in contact with me because he's convinced that we're friends. I haven't told you everything because it's too long, and in all fairness, it gets much worse. But I'm too terrified to stop dealing with him because of his violent activities. I'm scared that if I block him, he's going to come and hurt me, or he'll find me at my home. Even though we don't live close to each other and he is facing this possible time in prison, it still terrifies me thinking that I could have to see him again. Thankfully, he does live in a different city, a couple hours away from me. But he still sends me messages on a regular basis. So Lewis, please stay where you are. Get some help. And please, let's not meet again. It was a few years ago. I must have been roughly 15 at the time. I'm now 18. I go to bed early one evening after a very basic day. However, that night I wake up around midnight and feel something right away that makes me understand that something's wrong. Go downstairs. I see my mother panicked on the phone and my father was not there. I then ask her what's going on, and she explains to me that she's on the phone with the police because there's a man at my grandfather's house who says he lives here because the person who lived there before died recently. My grandfather lived in a very big house, alone because my grandmother died when my mother was 16 years old. He must have been about 65 at the time of the event and had some health problems. However, he was completely independent and did not need any special care. He also had a dog named Emily, who for reasons of her own usually slept outside. That evening, my mother received a call from police who explained to her that the neighbors called them because the dog Emily was barking in the street and the gate was wide open. So the police arrived at my grandfather's house. He knocked on the door and come across a man who explains that he lives here and that the man who lived before him has unfortunately died. Finding the man strange, they started looking around the house and found a phone that did not belong to this man. The first contact had been my mother, and they called her directly. She explains that no, the man living there was not deceased, and that it was her father who was in fact living in this house, and had done so for the last 40 years. Panic sets in, and many theories start. Questions like, could this man have come in and killed my grandfather, and why would he now be staying at his house? My mother was too panicked to drive, so it was my father who left to go to my grandfather's house. My grandfather lived about 45 minutes from us, but luckily my auntie lived about 5 minutes from him. So my father and my auntie met at my grandfather's house. They both arrive to the house and they notice that the man is definitely not my grandfather. A search then begins, and no one finds my grandfather. They go around the house calling him dozens of times with no response. Everyone is really starting to think that the man had killed my grandfather and hid him in one of the many rooms of the house. Until a man came near the house, humming and asking what was going on. The police then explained that he shouldn't stay there, and he replies, "But this is what is happening in my house." Thankfully, it was my grandfather, who was simply coming back from his girlfriend's house. The panic subsided, the police took the man away, and my grandfather never filed a complaint against him. The man had entered into his house before my grandfather had closed it badly. Unfortunately, when the man had entered the property, he left the gate open, because the dog managed to get out and start barking and wandering the streets. Because if that didn't happen, who knows what he could have done to my grandfather if he had come home alone. A few months later, my mother was visiting my grandfather and they started hearing noises coming from outside. As they leave, they see this man trying to get in by shaking the gate. My mother starts yelling at him to leave, and my grandfather very calmly asks him to leave, and the man replies, "But I just want to pet the dog." He ended up leaving a few minutes later and was never seen again. My grandfather unfortunately died a few months ago due to health problems, but in any case, this man never came back, at least from what he told us. So, to the creepy man who tried to say that my grandfather's home was his own, let's not meet and get some help. Good evening to everyone. Today I'm going to tell you a story that started in March 2021. And 3 months ago, we got answers about what happened. I also want to say that this is my first time posting something on Reddit, so please don't judge me. Okay, let's move on to the story. My name is Lara. I'm 18 years old now, and I live in Portugal. I lived here until I was 5, and then my parents decided to move to Switzerland because they found it a wonderful country to live in. We decided to come back to Portugal in 2019 because we already missed the family a lot. And since in the meantime I had a little sister, it was really important that she had this connection with them. So we arrived in Portugal, and directly we rent a house which belongs to my father's aunt. The years go by, everything goes well. I manage to adapt little by little to the culture. We adopt a German Shepherd to better protect the house, and even managed to contact my best childhood friends. So there you go. Everything was going wonderfully. In 2021, things around the house were getting too weird. There were a few nights where I would go to bed really late because I was having a lot of insomnia at the time, and I would hear noises coming from the attic. At the time, I didn't care that much because we had a tree that was next to the room outside, so I figured it was just the branches hitting the tiles, giving it seemed like it was coming from the attic. Months pass, and more often I hear noises coming from upstairs in my room. Then I decide to ask my father what's in the attic. So he explains to me that in 2018, when we returned, he had stored chairs in the attic, which was almost inaccessible because you could only climb up a ladder which was not very stable. Since we didn't need these chairs, my father left them there until we moved house again. In the meantime, the noises stopped, but strange things still happened, and I start to feel uncomfortable at home. For example, my father bought one of those boxes to watch TV and many channels from other countries too. So I sometimes, even when I was alone in the house, I didn't even turn on the box because it was too complicated. I had to configure it and everything, in short. What was strange was coming home after a long day of school for me and work for my parents. And sometimes the television was on the channel Fox Comedy. Well, we thought that it was probably one of our parents who had forgotten to turn off the TV in the morning. The problem is, it doesn't happen but 9 times, and every time when we came home, my dog would bark very loud as if he wanted to tell us something. My parents are starting to get a bit worried, but they didn't do anything. They pretend it's nothing important so that I don't worry either. The years go by and these weird things don't stop. In August 2023, we decided to change houses, but not for the weird stuff. We also took the chairs out of the attic, and there was nothing else, or so we thought. The next resident of this house will be a rather nice man that we'll call Balthazar, and he was the one who will discover everything. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because at least it wasn't us. In fact, this gentleman really wanted to take up as much of the attic as possible because he's a painter. and the house was rather small, so he decided to take some cleaning products to clean the attic. He starts, and that's when he sees a rather large box and thinks it was probably us who left it. So he decides to see what it is, so he can take it downstairs and call us to let us know. Except, when he opens the box, there's a man sitting in there with a bottle of piss and a lot of bread around him. Balthazar gets scared, but the man says to him, "Please, I'm not going to hurt you. Don't be afraid." Balthazar was still very scared. He didn't understand why there was a man sitting in his attic, and that's when the gentleman told him his story. In fact, this man is a former resident of the house named Gabriel, and kept a key in secret because he said he lost his wife in the house due to cardiac arrest. So from time to time he came into the house, but only to the attic, so that no one would see him and to feel close to his wife who died there. Balthazar still tells him that he's calling the police, and Gabriel understands the situation perfectly, and due to his trespassing, he gets 8 years in prison. Weeks later, Balthazar tells us his story, and manages to explain to us that in fact he watched the Fox Comedy Channel because his wife loved the TV channel. So looking around the house really made him feel closer to his wife. My father also said that he put chairs in the corner of the attic where you couldn't see the hidden box. So the suspicions were definitely real. But no one in our family is traumatized or anything because the man really didn't want to hurt us. But it's still really creepy at the same time. Look, to everybody listening, just check your attics, just to be safe. Well, to all of those that made it through these terrifying encounters, I hope that you have enjoyed and that you would like to hear some more. In this situation, please remember, if you're awake, to like and subscribe. But if you're asleep, I hope you are having truly amazing nightmares. Now I'm going to be adding about 60 minutes of ocean noise in the background of this video, recorded from one of my local beaches. So just listen, relax, and let the white noise take you further into your dreams. I'm Grim, and I'm out. Signing